talked about. But before we get going, Doctor Scott Kobaba, I want you to tell the folks a little bit about you, about yourself.
Okay, I'm an internist in just a suburb of Chicago. I've been in practice for over 30 years. I love what I'm doing. I've got seven kids and a big dog. So I'm not sure where all the kids came from, but they just showed up and we took them in. I love to practice medicine, and I got interested in this type of thing when I had some unusual experiences that happened to me, and then some other doctors came to me with some stories, and I thought this sounds very interesting. I've never written a book before, and I thought I'd just give it a shot, and it turned out really well. It's been a very popular book. We've got a contract with a publisher in Russia. It's going to be published in Russia in April, so it's doing really well, and I'm really excited.
Awesome. You can't see it, but we have your book in our background right now, and you let's go to the beginning. You had a miracle of sorts happen, and that's what got you started on this track to find out if there's more.
Yeah, that was one of the things that happened initially, and when you look back at your life, I think lots of people will realize that there are some miracles that to help them in the direction that they have ended up. But the thing that happened to me was we had a fellow that was sick in Arkansas, and he called me up. He said, I've got this abdominal pain, and it sounded like gallbladder. It was right up her abdomen where the gallbladder is located. So I said, why don't you go to the emergency room and see what they say? So he headed off to the emergency room, and about an hour later, I got a call from the ER, and they said, well, we gave him some morphine. He's doing better. We couldn't find anything wrong with his gallbladder. We did an ultrasound and some blood tests, and he's just fine. So I said, okay, well, when he comes back to Illinois, why don't you have him see me? And a couple of days later, indeed, he came back, and I saw him. It sounded like classic gallbladder, right upper abdominal pain, a little nausea, a little vomiting. So I sent him off for some fancy gallbladder tests, and everything was normal. I did the blood work again, including some special blood work for gallbladder and liver. Everything was perfectly normal. And so I've got a little frustrated because, you like to know what's going on with the person. He was having some pretty severe pain. We had a CAT scan, we had ultrasounds, and a couple of days later, I was thinking about him at night, and I woke up in the morning with an idea that he needed a lung scan. Now, this is really bizarre because he had abdominal pain. Why would he need a lung scan? So I called him up about 7 o'clock in the morning, and I said, Frank, I think you need a lung scan. He almost laughed on the phone. He said, what do you mean a lung scan? Why should I do a lung scan? I've got abdominal pain. I still have it. I'm flying off to Denver at 1 o'clock for my business, and I can't take the time to get a lung scan this morning. And so I said, well, if I can get it in right away and you get out by 10, would you do it? And he said, well, he finally agreed. So I called the radiology department and I said, I need a stat lung scan. And they laughed at me because they were booked up till all hours of the day. And I said, I need to get this in right away. Probably made up some lame excuse as to why I needed to get it done. So he went in there and got the lung scan, sure enough. And about an hour later, I got a call from the radiologist. He said, nice call, Scott. And I said, what do you mean? He said, he's got a massive pulmonary embolus, a blood clot sitting on his diaphragm, which is why he has abdominal pain and not chest pain. And you really called a good one here. And I thought I had to sit down for that one because my legs got a little shaky after that. Mm-hmm. And I thought to myself, what a interesting series of events, that something from beyond where I was located had alerted me to do a lung scan, which actually saved his life. Wow. So he was admitted to the hospital, did great.
Well, that's incredible. But what you're suggesting what I'm picking up from that, doctor, is that you were included in this medical miracle.
Yeah, it was truly a miracle. There was no reason to get a lung scan. It wasn't it wasn't so far out of the realm of possibility that it was a crazy thing, but it really was unusual that we would get a lung scan and find this big pulmonary embolus sitting on his diaphragm, which is why he had the abdominal pain. It was just I get goosebumps every time I even think about what happened there.
Okay, so that event happened, and I imagine you thought about that quite a bit. Did you reminisce of any other previous events that were like that you may not have noticed? Because now that your awareness of this possibility is now evident in your life. Did
Yeah.
you reflect on earlier things? Well, you know what? This may have happened back then.
Yeah. There were a couple other things that happened, Daniel. One was a personal experience, and one was another physician that came up to me with a story. The personal experience was in Cape Cod. Have you ever been to Cape Cod?
No, sir.
It's a beautiful place. We love it there. My wife grew up off the Cape, and we take the kids there about every 2 or 3 years.
Hmm.
We love the seafood, we love the ocean, we love the beach, everything about it. So we were at Cape Cod, and the whole family comes. I've got 7 kids, so as they get married and have kids of their own, it gets larger and larger. I think we're up to 30 this year for a vacation, and we're going back to Cape Cod this year,
Nice.
interestingly. So we were at Cape Cod. We're having a lot of fun, and on the Cape and on vacation, the boys like to cook, and we do a pretty good job. Somebody can boil water, and somebody can cook the corn, things like that. So we decided to go out to the store and get some good things to eat, things that we wouldn't normally eat, like swordfish and which we had in the grill and corn on the cob. And
Okay.
when we were out at the store, all the boys were looking at the pies. There was a big stack of pies there, and there were cherry pies, and we decided to get 6 cherry pies because that's about how many we'd eat. And so we brought those back, and we were starting to talk because my mother, who'd passed away, loved to make rhubarb pie. We had a big rhubarb
Wow.
plant in my backyard. And every fall, she would make rhubarb pie, and we'd sneak into the house and we'd grab our spoons and we'd dig into the rhubarb pie. We didn't care about the germs or anything like that. So we'd finish off a couple rhubarb pies in her kitchen. And we thought, if Grandma was here, she'd make us a rhubarb pie, because she loved to do that, and she loved the family. She would have loved to be there. And did you ever have one of those days? It was just a perfect day that you'll remember forever. The sun was gorgeous, the gentle breeze, the kids were having fun, everyone was getting along. It was
Hmm.
just, I had to pinch myself. It was such a perfect day, and I kept thinking to myself, my mom would really love to be here to share this up, to share this moment with our family. And so we had the dinner, and it was really good. We really did a good job with the swordfish and everything else. And we then came to the dessert. And my wife cut a piece of pie, and I took a bite of it, and all of a sudden I got goosebumps again up and down my spine because it wasn't a cherry pie; it was a rhubarb pie. I I
Whoa.
looked at the box. The box said cherry pie. Everything said cherry, but it was a rhubarb pie. And I thought to myself, this is more than a coincidence.
Hmm.
I think my mom is telling me that she was there looking out after us and enjoying the incredible family time that we were having on that vacation. And so I can't prove that, but it just was such a coincidence
Hmm.
that
Have
I
you
think she was there.
have you ever heard the term synchronicity?
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah,
And now you say you have 7 children.
yep,
Okay.
yep.
Well, here's some synchronicity for you. My parents had 7 children, and we grew up next to a a lady that grew rhubarb, and we had rhubarb pie all the time. And there were 7 children. Just saying, just saying.
Daniel, there's some things, there are funny things that happen in this life, and
Well,
that was one of them.
yeah.
So, and that got me thinking, about other things that were beyond us, and about people that have left us that still can communicate with us.
Mhm.
And then the next thing that happened, do you have a minute for one more story that got
Absolutely.
me?
That's what you're here
Yeah.
for.
One other thing that got me really going on this book, and that is a good friend of mine, Dave Mokel, is a orthopedic surgeon, and a good friend. And he has done some work on a number of my patients. And we were on the floor, and he came running up to me and he said, "Scott, I've got this incredible story to tell you." And I said, "Okay, Dave, tell me." And he said, "Well, I can't tell it to you here. Someone might hear it." And that piqued my curiosity. So we went into a patient's room that was empty, closed the door. And he said, "I want to tell you about Mary, a mutual patient. Mary
Mhm.
was operated on for an ankle problem." And Dave said when she was, and I knew the story. Dave said when she was operated on, she arrested. They gave her an antibiotic, and it looks like she had a reaction to the antibiotic, and she arrested. Her heart stopped. She stopped breathing, eyes closed, dead, basically. And so they started to do CPR. And when you call a code in the OR, everyone rushes in from the other ORs to help out. And one of the guys that rushed in was a tech that had bright red hair underneath his operating room cap, and he started to do CPR. And Mario's a big lady, and he couldn't do CPR well enough so that Dave Mokel couldn't feel a pulse. So he said, "Please step aside. I'd like to, do the CPR and get her going again." And the fellow didn't step aside. And codes are not they're not polite events. When you have a code, it's a life and death thing. And Dave was in charge, and if she died, he would be in charge. So he knew he had to do something. So he pushed the guy aside, and then he started to do CPR. And he did enough that she got a pulse. They gave her some epinephrine, other drugs, and she came back, but she wasn't conscious for another day. And so they wheeled her off to the ICU. The cardiologist took over, and she survived, and she did really well. And they figured it was the antibiotic that caused her arrest, and she was literally dead on the table.
Whoa.
When Dr. Mocha was ready to discharge her, she was giving her final instructions for how to take care of the ankle, which she never operated on. And she said, "Well, thank you for saving my life." And Dave's a humble guy, and he said, "Well, it was just it was a team of effort, and we all pitched in." And she said, "No, no, I saw you push that guy aside that was doing the CPR that wasn't adequate enough."
Oh.
And Dave got a little weak-kneed and sat down. He said, "What do you mean? How did you see him?" And she said, "When I arrested, I rose up to the top of the room and I could see everything that was happening. I saw the guy that you pushed aside. I saw the girl walk in with the yellow stethoscope. I saw, and she mentioned dozens of very minute details that no one could have told her, and that she had to have been there." And she said, "When I was there, my grandmother came to me. My grandmother had been dead for about 20 years, and she told me that there was a place for me in heaven if I was good." Now, Mary was not a great patient. She was kind of a curmudgeon. Every time she'd come in and see you, she'd have something to complain about. "Why didn't you call in my prescription? Why are you late?" It was never a nice event. And so the grandmother evidently told Mary that if she was nice and kind, that she would have save a place for her in heaven.
Mm-hmm.
So after that, Mokel just tried to explain that scientifically. He couldn't come up with any scientific explanation for the whole thing. Mary, after that, was the nicest and kindest person in the world. She'd make us cookies when she came to see us. She never complained about anything. She took care of her ailing father. And I call that Mary's Christmas Carol because it's pretty much like the Scrooge story.
Mm-hmm.
But after I heard that, I thought to myself, I wonder if other doctors, because I never, doctors don't talk about this stuff. Doctors talk about their golf game and,
Mm-hmm.
about their patients, but they don't talk about these deep, heavy spiritual things.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought to myself, if Dave had this experience, I've had a couple experiences. I wonder if other docs have had experiences like that.
Mm-hmm.
So that got me going, Danielle, and I talked with other doctors and found out that lots of doctors have these experiences.
Why are doctors reluctant to talk about miracles? It seems that it would be some inspiration to people that are in need of some medical attention.
Yeah, you think so, but these are ordinary docs. These are docs that you or I would go to for gallbladder, for a heart attack, for a cold, whatever, and they take care of lots of patients. And I think they were afraid if they said that they saw a ghost, that they had a premonition, that they had a dream, that patients would think that they were crazy and stop going to them. They really were afraid of being on the edge. There are some docs that are on the edge, and lots of patients kind of avoid them. But these were just ordinary docs I've known for sometimes 30 years, and they were just afraid of revealing these miraculous stories.
Mm-hmm.
Once they did, though, it's very interesting that happened. Patients loved it, and they started to tell us stories about their miraculous experience. So
Mm-hmm.
it kind of opened up a whole dialogue
Mm-hmm.
of spiritual experiences that everyone has, I think.
Yeah, in fact, you can't see it, but there's a title art above we got off your website. It says, Discover the Miracles in Your Own Life. Does your book give some sort of tips on how somebody can discover the miracles in their own life?
Daniel, I think it's just a lot of these are coincidences. And I think people that are engaged in doing something good get some extra help. Um,
Yeah.
so look out for there are lots of little things that happen in your life that I didn't recognize before I wrote this book.
Mm-hmm.
I can tell you a story about getting into medical school.
Yeah, let's
Do
hear
we
it.
have time here?
Absolutely.
Um, I was trying to get into medical school. Now, I was an economics major in college, and I thought, I didn't like school very much. I wanted to finish up. I had a B average. I
Mm-hmm.
wasn't a great student, and I finished. And I thought I'll never go to school again. Well, after a little bit, I realized I really wanted to get back to medical school because that's what I wanted to do all my life. And I kind of switched off in college, and I got off the wrong track and ended up in economics. Although I love economics. So I had to take the prerequisite courses, and there's a number of prerequisites you had to take. And I was married at the time. I had a couple kids already. I gave myself, one more year to get into medical school. If I didn't, I'd have to go out and get a real job and get on with my life. So this was the last year I had, and I had to take one class, and that was organic chemistry. Now, organic chemistry in Chicagoland is offered a night school, because I had a day job. It was offered a night school at two places, Aurora University and Roosevelt University. So I enrolled in Aurora University. I thought this is great. I lived like 10 miles from this university. It was perfect. I went to the bookstore. There's a ton of books in the bookstore. I bought a book, went to the class, and there were three kids in the class. And I thought, this is great. I'll have, personal attention. Well, the professor walked in the first evening class, and he said, "I'm very sorry. We're canceling the class. There's not enough students." Well, my heart sunk. I thought, this is my medical school career is over. I'm never going to be a doc. And then I realized Roosevelt University, which is downtown Chicago, 75 miles from where I lived, offered the class. So I zipped down there, and I got in line the next morning with this long line. And I went to the registrar's office, and I said, I finally got up to the front of the line, and I said, "I'd like to enroll in organic chemistry. I need to do that to get into medical school." And I gave her my sad story. And she said, "I'm very sorry. We have one class that's filled. That was our first class. We opened up a second class, and that's filled. And we have 8 or 9 people on the waiting list, and they all have the same sad story that you have." And I just, I thought my life is over. I won't be a doctor. I won't achieve my goals in life. And so I said, I was desperate. And I said, "Well, who makes the ultimate decision on organic chemistry? Who gets in and who doesn't?" She said, "That's the professor." And I said, "Well, where's the professor right now?" And she said, "It's on the third floor. Go up there. He's interviewing students right now." So I ran up to the third floor. I must have had tears in my eyes, or I must have had something that looked really sad. Because when I went up to the secretary there, I said, "I just need to talk with the professor for 1 minute." And she said, "Okay, go to the ante room. The two professors that are teaching the class are talking in the room right now. There's a little ante room right outside. If you promise to only take a minute, I'll let you do that." So I walked to the ante room, and all the dirty looks I got from all the students that were there waiting for the same thing, I had to do it. And so I was waiting there. And the door was very, very thin, and I could hear the professors talking, and you couldn't help it but hear them talking. And they were saying, "It's really a shame. We've got two classes. The first class we've got the books for, but the second class," now this is before computers, you can get a book on a computer. And the second class we have no books for. We've called the publisher. We've called all the universities in the area. No one has organic chemistry books. I don't know what we're going to do. This class starts in 2 days, and we're really in trouble here. So they finished their conversation, shook hands, and I went in to talk with the professor. And he was very uninterested in me, because he'd heard this story multiple times. I need to get in because I need to go to medical school or dental school or vet school or whatever. And so he said, "I'm very sorry. The classes are filled, and we can't help you." And so right then, I did something I don't normally do. And I said to him, "If I can get you the books, I understand you need some books. If I can get you all the books, would you let me in the class?" And by this time, Daniel, my heart was in my neck. I was pounding like this, waiting for his answer. And he took a long time. And I could tell he was interested, because for the first time, he made eye contact with me. And he said, "Can you get me 30?" And I said, "More." And there was a long pause again, the heart up, in my throat. And then he said, "You're in."
Whoa.
That got me in. Now think about this. What are the odds that I would have been there at the exact time that those two professors were talking about something that only I could help them with, that only they could help me with? And, I didn't realize it was such an incredible, it was more than a coincidence. I think I was directed there at that very second to hear those professors talking about that. Well, sure enough, they went to Royal University, got tons of books, and they opened, they had the books for both classes. I got in. I didn't get the A, but I got a B plus, and so that got me into medical school.
Wow.
Had I not done that, I wouldn't have gotten into medical school.
Well, it seems that there was a diversion on your path of life. Have you ever heard of a Schrodinger's cat?
No, no.
Okay, it's a thought experiment, and in that there's a box, and inside is a cat. And the theory is you put a little bit of radioactive material in there, and the theory is that the cat is both dead and alive until you open the box. But I would take that further and say the cat is either dead or alive in a box, and it's either a black cat or a brown cat, or it's not a cat at all. It's not anything until that box is open. And
Yeah.
that's kind of the way it is. Like when someone goes to a doctor to get a test, and recently I had some routine tests done,
Mhm.
and you get to that why in your life. Was the test going to go that way, or is the test going to that way?
Yeah.
But you never know. Was something out there's intention for you to have the negative report, but then somebody else or something switched it to the right? You don't know. But what you're
Right.
saying is what happens to a lot of people is there seems to be some sort of other influence of we call it coincidence, synchronicity, you know, that there's something at play. And I think that's probably what your book is saying. There's something else at play. Well, let's get to a couple of questions. Got people watching the show and they want to talk to you.
Sure.
Jim Taylorson says, Doctor, with COVID still running rampant, do you think we'll get back to normal, or do we need a medical miracle?
I think we'll eventually get back to normal, but this virus is such a funny virus. We don't know everything about it. All these mutations are coming about now. Is the vaccine going to apply for the Brazil mutant, the South African mutant, the English one? Um, I think it's going to be with us for a while. I think we're going to eventually have a herd immunity because lots of people have had it already that don't even realize it, maybe even as many as 25% of the population, some estimate. And the vaccine seems to be pretty effective for most of the strains. So I think by the fall, I think we're going to be in pretty good shape.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Rapid Fire says, Doctor, do you know, so it says, do you know when someone is about to die before they flatline?
Um, you know, Doctors, I always say to people and especially students that a good doctor would walk into a room and know how close a person is to death just by the way they look. You may not know what they have, but you can kind of sense that this person is really sick and needs to go right into the hospital or call an ambulance or whatever. So, um, and as a person slips away and is dying, they have certain breathing patterns and certain heartbeats and so forth that you can recognize, so that you know when a person has a very short time to live.
Mm.
So yeah,
Mm-hmm. Okay. Rose says, Doctor, what do you think of the COVID vaccine?
I think it's great. This is a phenomenal vaccine. I think it's 95%, 94, 95% effective for the Moderna and the Pfizer vaccine. The Johnson and Johnson was a little bit less. Unfortunately, it was
Mm-hmm.
66% effective. But the vaccines are look like they're very safe. I got both of my shots already, and I had a sore arm for a day. I tried to whine to my wife, but she wouldn't listen to me. And after a day, it went away. But I
Mm-hmm.
think the vaccines are great. They're safe. And I think if you haven't had the virus, even if you have, they're recommending you
Mm-hmm.
still get it.
There's there's a lot of conflicting stories out there, anecdotal stories such as Hank Aaron. They said that he took the vaccine a couple of weeks before he died, and that scares people. And then I think the other thing is people would probably like to trust that the vaccine is good, but so many forces are playing on this thing, and there's a struggle for advantage in different factions over this vaccine, and people look at it like, well, it, is it coming to me because somebody's trying to do something to me, or what? So because people aren't together on that, it is contributing to distrust in the population that's going to refuse to get that.
Yeah, and that's a shame because there are lots of people that are pretty high risk. People over 60 are pretty high risk. And they did some pretty extensive testing on this vaccine. They had about 30,000 people. We were involved with some of the preliminary testing on the AstraZeneca vaccine. And 30,000 people is quite a large number of people. And they had very few major side effects, some allergic reactions, which you get with anything. But I think it's a pretty safe vaccine. And when you have a 95% vaccine, the flu vaccine is about half that in
Mhm.
terms of effectiveness.
Yeah.
Everyone knows someone that's gotten the flu vaccine and got the flu,
Mhm.
and that was seemed like that was the standard
But
last year. But I think
wait,
it's a pretty safe
well, let
vaccine.
me ask you this: are people still getting the flu? I haven't heard anything about it.
I think with wearing the masks, it's not just the flu, it's the lots of different viruses, metapneumovirus and respiratory syncytial virus, and a whole bunch of typical viruses that affect us that can sometimes be more serious than the flu, are just they just disappeared.
Mhm.
We're not seeing any of that at all. We haven't seen any. My partner saw
Mhm.
one flu case maybe a month ago.
Mhm.
But we're not seeing the flu. We're not
Mhm.
seeing all these respiratory infections. I think it's social distancing. I think it's masks. And they're a little worried that once we take the masks off, all these viruses are going to come back with a vengeance. But so far, we're not seeing them.
Mhm. Mhm. Uh, Medical miracle stories. I got one, and the folks watching the show for a long time have heard this, but I'll tell you because this probably could have went in your book. But my older brother was doing a wheelie on a motorcycle, ran right into a post and punctured his lung, and he was
Oh,
dying in the hospital. And my dad told me he was in the bathroom crying, and somebody put their hand on his shoulder and said, "Your son's not going to die." And he immediately turned around, and no one was there. So,
wow.
and he didn't die. Um, has anybody of the stories that you gathered talked about family members, say, or anybody else maybe appearing to someone and saying you're not going to die?
There's a number of stories like that. Let me just give you one of my favorites. It's about a little old lady, Grandma Hanlon, and Grandma Hanlon was the grandmother of Joan Heitzler. Now, Joan Heitzler was the wife of John Heitzler, who's an obstetrician and gynecologist.
Mm-hmm.
He delivered two of our kids, and
Oh.
the kids are still talking and walking. And so, Joan was in the delivery room delivering, I think, their fifth child. He has 8 kids, and this is the fifth child, and she was having some difficulties, and Grandma Hanlon walked into the delivery room and literally saved her life. Let me go back and tell you a little bit about Grandma Hanlon, though. Grandma Hanlon grew up in Ireland, and she was at a time when the Protestants and the Catholics were having lots of
Mm-hmm.
difficulties, and Grandma Hanlon's father was a very sympathizer for the Catholic priest, and he would hide Catholic priests in his home, and he recognized that it was a very dangerous time to be there. So he sent little Grandma Hanlon, who wasn't grandma at the time, to the United States, and she got married and grew up, and she became a midwife. And she was, actually the picture of spirituality for the family. She would deliver babies and do it for nothing if they couldn't afford to pay
Mm-hmm.
her. She was just an incredible person. And then she got too old to deliver and work, so she decided to live with Joan's mother,
Mm-hmm.
and Joan became very close to Grandma Hanlon. They bonded so well. And Joan would say, if I can get to Grandma Hanlon's lap, if I'm in trouble with my mom, I'll be safe. And so that was the kind of relationship they had.
Mm-hmm.
So when Joan was delivering her fifth child, everything went well, but then there was some afterbirth that had to be removed, and they had to do some manipulation. It was very painful. So at the time, the drug of choice was called trilene, and they would give a mask of trilene onto the woman's face. They would go into a deep sleep. They'd be able to do the procedure, then they'd take the trilene off. Well, they were about ready to do the trilene with Joan, and Grandma Hanlon walks into the room with her typical polka dot dress and her sweater vest, a little sweater vest, and her hair up in a bun, all white hair in a bun, the little grandma shoes. And she stood at the foot of the bed, and she said, "No, Joan, don't do the trilene." So Joan pushed it away. Well, no one realized that Joan had eaten a large meal right before she went into labor. So about 1 minute after she pushed the trilene away, she vomited the entire meal. Had she had the mask on and was unconscious, she would have aspirated that whole meal and may have died from that. So Joan and Jack Heisler feel that Grandma Hanlon literally saved her life, and Joan would say she made it to Grandma Hanlon's lap one last time, uh,
Mm-hmm.
overcoming time and all space and eternity, because Grandma Hanlon had died 22 years before that.
Wow. Wow. That was a banger there at the end. Um, so yeah, it sounds like a visitation there. You mentioned something in that story that you mentioned earlier. That do you think there's something that the result of your test or your recovery has to do with how you are as a person?
I think we all the doctors know that recovery has a lot to do with mental attitude. And we're trying to encourage people with cancer, for example, to have a positive mental attitude, because it's been shown that people that are positive, that are optimistic, that are willing to fight, do much better than people that aren't,
Mm-hmm.
dramatically better.
Mm.
And
Okay.
so there's no question that mental attitude has a lot to do with
That's interesting.
healing.
Interesting you say that. Years and years ago, I remember there was somebody I know was in the hospital and they were near death, and there was another person. I don't know if they're in the same. Can't remember if they're in the same room or next room, but they had the exact same condition and near death. So they were both of them was near death.
Mm-hmm.
The guy I didn't know was very angry and he was cursing all the time, and the one I did know was very calm and collected and was almost sort of accepting of his fate. Well, what happened was the angry guy died off, and the other guy, he was able to go home and spent a month with his wife, and then died peacefully in his bed. And I always think of that as if the anger just cut the guy's life expectancy off, but a feeling of goodwill. I mean, obviously the woman, the wife had a chance to be with her husband, to see him rather than just disappear, just by. So I think there is something to that. All right, let's get to another question for you, Doctor. This is from Kat. It says, how do we become more sensitive to supernatural experience you're describing?
I think I think everyone has either their family or they personally have had an experience like I'm describing. When I talk to my patients, many people will say, "Oh yeah, can I tell you about my experience?" Because I love to talk about my stories to my patients, and I spend a lot of time. Always am late seeing people because I'm talking too much, but they'll invariably have an experience like I've had. So look for those. Ask your parents, ask your brothers and sisters about any experience that they've had. But if you're just aware of things around you, aware of it's especially coincidences. If you're aware of the little coincidences that happen to us all the time, those are things that, in many cases, are more than coincidence.
Mm-hmm.
And there were many people that say there are no such things as coincidences.
Mm-hmm.
So look for those little things, those little coincidences. There was a doctor, John Showalter, who is a great hand surgeon, and he went to University of Iowa for medical school. Loved it there. Wanted to study at University of Iowa, but they didn't have a place for him for his residency. You go to 4 years of medical school, then you serve a residency
Mm-hmm.
in the particular specialty that you wanted to be, and he wanted to be a hand surgeon. So they didn't have anything at Iowa, so he had to go to University of Indiana. And he was so disappointed. He said that was the greatest disappointment in my whole life, to have to leave the institution I loved. Well, the funny thing is, at University of Indiana, they were doing a new technique. It was new at the time, called microsurgery. There were only two institutions in the whole country doing microsurgery at the time, and that was one of them. And then Dr. Showalter learned how to do microsurgery, which allowed him then the possibility of reattaching hands and fingers and things like that hadn't been done before.
Mm-hmm.
So he got out, finished, loved microsurgery, and he put a word out to all the emergency rooms in the area. If anyone cuts their hand off or severs a finger or something, get in touch with me. I'd like to try my skills to sew it back on.
Mm-hmm.
So sure enough, after a while, there was a young 18-year-old guy that took a skill saw through his forearm and cut his hand off. And so they got the hand, they put it on ice, they brought him to the emergency room, and he started a 17-hour operation. And sure enough, he was one of the first ones, if not the first one in Illinois, to do what's called a hand replant. He attached the hand, and it took him 17 hours, 2 operating room crews, lots of pizzas, and they attached the hand, and it worked. And so the kid, 2 years later, came back and said, "I still have a complaint. Every time I play football and I catch the ball, my hand tingles a little bit." And Dr. Showalter said, "That's too bad. You've got a new hand there." So the interesting thing about that, Daniel, is that, what a coincidence that he didn't get into Iowa, that he got into Indiana. Mm-hmm. And he loved what he did, and he's been able to replant hands and fingers and save many, many people since that time with his skill that he learned by the coincidence of not being at Iowa, but being at Indiana, where he had the opportunity to do the microsurgery. So I think people should watch for those coincidences in their lives. they're not coincidence. I think there is some divine intervention here
Mhm.
that directs all of us at some point in our life,
Mhm.
and
Wouldn't
sometimes many times.
wouldn't you say fellow doctors suggest that that type of thinking is not scientific and therefore is is not really true?
That's what's so crazy about this book, because all these are very scientific doctors. They don't believe in other means of healing, but they all experienced these unusual events. And that's what was so fascinating to me, that these are all scientists that are pretty callous and pretty, prove it to me.
Hmm.
But they had these experiences like Dave Mokel with Mary and the arrest. He couldn't figure out. He all he said was, I can't figure this out. It happened, and that's all I can say. And there's got to
Hmm.
be something higher above us that's controlling the situation and not us.
Hmm. Years ago, I think it was in the early 50s, maybe 60s, uh, doctors, I don't know if they were in the United States or where they were, but they transplanted a monkey head on another monkey and a dog's head on another dog. Is that ethical?
I think for animals it's probably ethical, but I don't think it would be easily done for humans. There's so
Hmm.
many nerve connections and so
Hmm.
forth. I think hands and things like that you can replant.
Hmm.
They are doing some transplants of faces. So
Hmm.
talk about heart transplants and kidney transplants. I mean, the question is that ethical? Saves a life,
Hmm.
and they're doing some face
Hmm.
transplants now, which are absolutely amazing. So
Hasn't there been evidence that when somebody has a transplant, an organ transplant in particular, that they begin to have thoughts or memories that may have been the donors?
I've not run into that. So maybe that's the case, but I've not heard of that or
Sounds
seen
like
that.
sounds like a next book opportunity for you.
All right, I'll start asking around.
And we are at the top of the hour, so at this point here, how can people get your book?
They can go on Amazon, and it's just put my name in, or Physicians Untold Stories. It's available through Amazon. It's been an Amazon bestseller too, interestingly. So,
Yeah.
or they can go to Russia in 4 months and get it in Russian.
Well, this day and age, people need to know that miracles still do exist, and I'm glad as heck that you wrote that book, took the time to get those stories. All right, got another question from Joey Splatz. Um, what makes you believe we are being told the truth about the COVID and the vaccine?
There are so many different companies that are involved. There are probably 30 companies involved, and they're all doing the testing. And I don't think it'd be too great to have a conspiracy with 30 different companies and 30 multiple different countries that are involved with this. And so I think we're being told the truth. I trusted it. I got the vaccine.
Mm-hmm. Okay. I don't want to really spend the whole show on that, but I guess that's on everybody's mind. I'll try to take this as the last question on the COVID. This is from Curious. Says, is it true that minimal asymptomatic spread of COVID-19? If so, why are masks are mandated?
Um, well, there's lots of spread that's of asymptomatic individuals, and many people are asymptomatic when they catch it. Some aren't. That's the problem. Some people die from this, and it's usually the older folks. It's very rare that people will die under the age of 55 or 60. But as
Mhm.
you get older, it's much more deadly. And so we wear masks mostly to prevent the people that are at risk from getting
Mhm.
this, the nursing
Mhm.
home residents, the people that are older. I had a 89-year-old woman and a 90-year-old man that lived together. They were quarantined. They did everything right. The maid must have brought it in. She comes in once a week. She must have brought it in. They both got it. He had a runny nose. He had every risk factor you can think of: diabetes and obesity and
Mhm.
hypertension and coronary disease. She was pretty healthy. She died, and he had a runny nose.
Mhm.
So, but people are still dying from this, and the
Mhm.
older folks. So we have to protect the older folks. That's what we're doing the
Mhm.
masks for.
Okay. Doreen 8951 says, Doctor, are most doctors atheists?
I think, well, I guess it depends on the location, but I think most doctors have some faith. At least the doctors that I'm dealing with now. I had a whole combination of interesting doctors. Some are very religious, some have no religion at all, some don't go to church or hardly believe. But some of these coincidences and some of these miracles, I think, changed their mind a little bit. But I
Mhm.
think, in general, I think most doctors have a faith of some kind.
You, as a doctor, when you look at how the body operates, just the eye, smell, touch, taste, these things, and then emotions of love, passion, anger. I mean, doesn't it seem that these are not organic things, but something else that is, say, resides in the same space as a body? There's something else going on. I mean, do you ever think that?
The body is so incredibly complex. I think about the brain with billions of neurons in one little tiny space the size of a marble, and how the eye works and how our emotions are. It's mind-boggling. I think there has to be something else going on here. But the body is very complex and very
Mm-hmm.
well engineered, well designed.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a miracle, I think, that we have our bodies, and should think about that every day. It's a miracle that we can see.
Mm-hmm.
People that have almost lost their vision will tell me that they're so thankful that they can see again.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, so we need to be
Well,
thankful for what we have.
yeah, I agree with that. I think you used the key word design, and the design is unbelievable, really. It seems like the body's designed to take care of itself. Let's get to this question here. It says, is it normal to dream of a deceased loved one?
Sure, it is. We are very close to deceased loved ones. We're very and family members, and so, yeah, it's very normal to dream. And some of those dreams are just ordinary dreams. I think some of those dreams are sent by the deceased loved one.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I've got a couple dreams I think are very interesting.
Mm-hmm.
There's a I've got one story about a fellow, Rich Jorgensen, who was a surgeon, had a dream one night about his best friend. He was living. His best friend was a judge. Judge Glasso was his name,
Mm-hmm.
and he dreamt that the judge had a massive heart attack and died. And he saw him in his coffin in the funeral home. It was a very, very vivid dream. You know, Daniel, you probably had dreams, and you wake up in the morning and then you kind of forget about them.
Mm-hmm.
But there are some dreams that just stay with you,
Yeah.
and you just can't get
Mm-hmm.
them out
Yeah,
of your head.
absolutely.
And this is one of those dreams. This is just so realistic and so real that he happened to be having lunch with one of his friends who was kind of a semi 70s person, and she said that the earth spirit tells us that we have to tell our dreams if they're about somebody else to tell the dream to somebody that you dreamt about.
Mm-hmm.
So he finally decided to tell Judge Glasso that he dreamt that he was dead. Well, can you imagine calling up a person saying, "I dreamt that you were dead"? What would you say to that statement? The judge laughed and he said, "Okay, Rich, that was quite a dream." So and Rich said, "Well, I've been thinking about this for days. You have to go in to see a doctor. Would you just do me a favor? Have you seen a doctor recently?" And the judge said, "No, I haven't seen a doctor for years." And Rich said, "Well, could you just go in and get a physical? You just humor me." And the judge said, "Okay, it's not unreasonable." So he went to see one of our mutual friends, an internist, and the
Mm-hmm.
internist did all the tests, and he did all the x-rays and all the blood work and so forth, went over him head to toe, and he said, "You're perfectly fine. Don't listen to this crazy surgeon. What does he know about real medicine?" Because there's always a rub between surgeons and internists. The surgeons say that the internists think too much, and the internists say the surgeons don't think and they just operate. So that's a constant rub. So he said, "Don't listen to this crazy
Okay.
surgeon. You're going to be fine, Judge. Just go on your way." And when Rich heard that, he just got that knot in his stomach again. Remember, you've probably had that where
Mm-hmm.
you get that sick feeling that you need to do something. So he called him up and said, "Judge, I know you went to the physical, but could you just do me one more favor?" The judge laughed. He said, "Rich, I went to see for the physical. I did everything you said. What else do you want me to do?" And he said, "Well, can you see my cardiologist? Just humor me." So he did. He did a stress test. He failed it badly. He was put in the hospital immediately. He had an angiogram the next day. He had what's called a widowmaker, which is a narrowed artery that gives you a life expectancy of about 3 months, 3 to 6
Whoa.
months usually. He also had multiple coronary lesions. They took him to surgery the next day. They didn't want him to wait. They didn't want him to go home, and they did a bypass, which literally saved his life.
Mhm.
And so Judge Glasso said, "Rich, thank you for being persistent and telling me about your dream."
Mhm.
And I'm convinced that was more than just a funny dream. That was something that told him to save his life.
Well, I'm wondering if the indigenous Indian population here knew about that because they have the dream catchers,
Hmm.
which to me tells me that they believe that the dreams are coming to them or at them or for them, one or the other. I think that's actually to capture the bad ones. But they seem like they're saying they come from somewhere else. So in the human body, particularly say in the mind, the brain, you got synapse, you've got all these different components, the neurons.
Hmm.
Is there any place for a dream to reside in there?
Well, I think you have, the connections in the brain that give you memories. So,
Right,
so
right.
I think, that's and who knows where dreams come from? They
Mm-hmm.
come from. I think they come from outside sometimes. Like this
Mm-hmm.
one, I think came from somewhere else. But dreams come from experiences that you had during the day and so forth. So,
Mm-hmm.
and you never know. I think we're given some premonition with some of the dreams that we have occasionally.
Mm-hmm.
So I think people should pay attention to their dreams, and they're not all going to be as dramatic as Dr.
Mm-hmm.
Jorgensen's dream, but I think we sometimes get a picture of some things that may be happening to us that we don't know about beforehand.
Mm-hmm. It seems to me that the brain is more built to be a player. Now, I can understand that a snapshot of a picture that resides somewhere in a single spot. But then when
Hmm.
it comes to dreams, it seems dreams are movies. So if it is just a bunch of your memories of these places, there's a car here and a plane here. Then next thing you know, you have a dream where the car is driving to the plane. Well, you can see the plane and the car, but who made the middle part of that? Who made that? And how did it become a motion picture to play in the dream? Of course, fantastic things happen in dreams that have nothing to
Hmm.
do with your memory. Nothing's
Hmm.
stored. So it's like something is choreographing a movie inside your head during a dream.
Yeah, yeah. And I wish we knew what it was. I think it's something that comes from inside your brain, but I think sometimes it comes from outside your brain.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Okay, I got this question here. It says, "Have you had any, or have any of the miracles you've experienced caused you to fall on your knees and just pray and thank God?"
yeah, they have. Some of these stories are just so incredible that you have to say this person was saved because there's just a divine intervention.
Mm-hmm.
I've got one good one on a lady that my wife went to school with. Her name is Kaminsky, and Barbara Kaminsky, and she developed MS, multiple sclerosis, when she was in high school, which is kind of young to have multiple sclerosis. And the kids used to make fun of her because she'd trip and they think that she was drinking or on drugs or something because she was stumbling. She was in gymnastics and had to stop because she got weak. And she continued to get worse and worse. She was a real fighter, and she went to college and she fought through all this. But finally, she ended up having a tracheostomy because she couldn't get enough air through her mouth, and she had collapsed lungs. She couldn't walk anymore. It was just, it was going downhill. And Dr. Marshall, who was the doctor taking care of her, who was a great doc, said it's time to enroll you in hospice because you don't have much time to live. And
Mm-hmm.
even her pastor came out, Pastor Bailey came out to see her, and he thought she's not going to live the week that's left. And so it was a sad situation. She wasn't a very old person. She was probably in her late 20s.
Mm-hmm.
And so everyone had enrolled her in hospice. Hospice is a program where you have to say the person's going to live less than 6 months, and it's just a very helpful. It's a wonderful program for people at the end of their life. And so she decided to. There's a radio program that offered these stories, and they would solicit prayers from people to pray for these individuals.
Mm-hmm.
So she was on the program, not literally. She was mentioned on the program, and they said, give us pray for Barb Kaminsky because she's, very, very sick with multiple sclerosis, and they don't expect her to live for much longer. And so her aunt came one day with a big bag of mail from all these people that heard the story, and they wrote letters that said, "We've been praying for you," and it was a Sunday afternoon, and she was sitting there with a couple of her friends that had just been to church. She couldn't go to church anymore; she was bed confined, and she was lying there, and she was talking to. Did we lose it again?
Yeah, we did.
They were sitting there, and the aunt had all these letters. And they were taking out the letters to look at what they said. Most of them would say, I'm praying for you. I'm hoping that you'll get better. I'm praying, and all of a sudden, Barb Kaminsky heard this voice in the back and behind her. It was a male voice, and it was a very kind and kind of reassuring voice. It was a voice that she'd never heard before, and the voice said, "Barbara, I want you to get up and walk." And she said she knew immediately. She said to her aunt, and she said to the girls that were there, "I just heard the voice of God tell me to get up and walk." They didn't hear it, only she heard it.
Mm-hmm.
And what she did was she got up out of bed. She took her braces off. The occupational therapist was there. She said, "Barbara, you can't do this. You can't do this." She took the oxygen out of her tracheostomy site, and she started to walk. She walked into the living room. She saw her mother there. Her mother started to cry and got down on her knees and felt her legs. And she said, "You've got legs again. Your muscles have come back." And she started to dance. She was a ballet dancer before, and she started to do the ballet. Her father came into the room. He couldn't believe what was going on. Barb was so excited that she sat on the couch and jumped up and down on the couch about 10 times with her butt. You know how you jump up and down, and she hadn't done that for years. There was not she could speak, she could breathe. Seemingly nothing was wrong with her at the time, and she was totally cured. The next night was church, and she wanted to go to church and show everyone that she was how good she was, because everyone knew she was dying.
Ooh.
And so she didn't have any clothes to wear because her mother had given all of her clothes away because she knew that she would never wear clothes again.
Yikes.
So she had to borrow some clothes from the neighbor. She got the clothes from the neighbor. So she was late for church. And as she walked up the steps of the church, she stood at the entrance and looked at the pastor who was facing the congregation. None of the congregation could see her. And the pastor stopped talking. He thought he was seeing a ghost. He didn't know what to say, and he simply couldn't speak. And then she started to walk down the aisle. And the words that were spoken by all the congregation, "Isn't that Barb Kaminsky? I thought she was dying. What happened to her? What's going on here?" And then spontaneously, as if directed by a choir of angels, they started singing "Amazing Grace, Amazing Grace, how great the sound." And so how that goes. Can you imagine how that was? People were in tears. The pastor finally could talk and asked to have Barb give her story. The next day, she went to her doctor's office. They took out the tracheostomy. They took out all the tubes, the urinary tubes, and so forth. She was perfectly fine.
Mm-hmm.
They couldn't believe it. Barb Kaminsky has continued. She vowed after this to serve God and to serve her fellow man in any way she could because she'd been saved. And she became the wife of a pastor. They live out, I think, in New Jersey.
Mm-hmm.
And she's now in her 70s and has dedicated her life to helping others. And that was truly the most incredible miracle that any of us have ever heard of or ever seen. It was truly a miracle.
Wow. That is amazing. It doesn't sound like it was a gradual, so Miss Kaminsky's getting better. Miss Kaminsky got healed. It sounds like to me there was some traumatic change, right?
It was
you say
just
instantaneous?
One minute she was very sick, the next minute she was totally healed. And the interesting thing, Daniel, is that I wrote her story out, and you have a deadline when you have to get the manuscript into the publisher, and I needed to have signatures from all these people, so that they would I had to get permission from everyone in the book,
Right.
and I couldn't find her. I looked she had been living in a number of different locations, and I couldn't find her. And so I'd called her like 6 months before. I called the numbers that I had. I wrote letters. And the day before I had to turn the manuscript in, I thought I'm going to have to leave her story out of the book because I couldn't get her. Well, guess what happened? About 8 o'clock that night, the phone rang. Guess who it was?
No,
Barb Kaminsky.
really.
She said, I got your, phone calls about 6 months ago, and I've been kind of procrastinating, but I thought, maybe you needed to talk with me tonight. What a
Wow.
coincidence. So I
I
got her
love it.
permission. I included that in the manuscript, and it's part of the book. Isn't that crazy?
That is crazy. That's almost prophetic. All right. How about this question here? Can dreams bring back previous lives?
Um, Explain what you mean about that. Dreams can, I think you can have dreams about people that have passed,
You,
but I don't know if they can bring back any lives.
hmm.
No.
Maybe they meant maybe 7-7 Abel. If you clarify that, maybe they meant can your dreams can you dream of your previous life? I guess maybe that'd be the way. All right, another question says, can doctors clone organs today?
Um, we're getting close, and that's a big area of research. So I don't think we've been able to do that quite yet, but
Mhm.
they're getting very close to cloning organs.
Have you ever had a patient and you got a diagnosis for them, and maybe you give them a shot that's not for that particular thing, and then they come back and say, "Thank you, doctor. Man, I feel so much better." And you're thinking, "I didn't do anything," but I'll go ahead and say, "You're welcome." Does anything like that ever happen?
That happens all the time. That happens all the time. You treat one condition, and all of a sudden you realize that they get better from the what you did, and for a totally unrelated condition. Sure,
Mm-hmm.
that happens.
Mm-hmm.
And I think medicine sometimes is a little bit of luck
Mm-hmm.
because we'll do the best we can, and you try something, and all of a sudden a person gets better, and you say, "Thank goodness I tried that," because
Mm-hmm.
and maybe it's more than luck. Maybe there's some divine intervention there too. Who knows?
Are are there more or less hospitals that are including prayer as a regimen for healing for people?
I think it's mostly up to the doc. It's not so much the hospital; it's more the
Mm-hmm.
doc. And I think there are doctors that do regularly pray with their patients, and some people like that very much, and some people don't.
Mm-hmm.
So it's more so that than anything else.
Mm-hmm.
I think in this age, the secular age, Daniel, I think we're getting away from that a little bit. People don't want to be offended; they want to be politically
Mm-hmm.
correct. So I think we're seeing a little bit less emphasis on religion and prayer in some of the medical communities, which is unfortunate, I think.
Yeah, on a lot of levels there. I went to a hospice part of a hospital just to visit people.
Hmm.
I was looking for people that didn't have family.
Sure.
And this one lady, um, she had sort of like makeup on, and I was, she's like 80 or 90, and I said, well, I said, let's dance. You want to go out for a date? I'm married though, but it didn't matter. My wife was right there. I said, hey, can we just have a date? And she's just beaming she
Sure.
didn't see that coming, right?
No.
And I'm thinking, just by her reaction and the way she was, she wasn't she wasn't hospice ready. And I think that is that where they start taking you off of like food and things to try to like do that. I was thinking, man, that ain't right.
Yeah. Um, Hospice is a great organization. They will help people, at the end of their life, and you really have to be certain that this person really is at the end of their life. Now, we've got I've had people in hospice for years,
Oh,
literally.
wow.
So because they do so well, you never expect them to live that
Hmm.
long. But usually hospice is for people that are, toward the end, and the hospice nurses and the hospice doctors help these people, the transition and help the families too. So I think it's
Hmm.
it's a good thing.
Hmm.
And one of the things that we had a palliative care doc that contributed to the book, and what she would do is very much what you just did, and that is they would ask to see if the person had a last request. And it's funny what some of these people, the last requests are. And they had she worked in San Diego for a little bit, and then one of the girls there that was dying. It's a tragedy when you get these young people that are dying. And she was like a 16-year-old, and she had, I think, leukemia, and everyone knew she was dying. and her request was she wanted to be on the beach and she wanted to go to the beach. Well, she was too sick to go to the beach.
Hmm.
So they brought the beach to her. They brought sand into the room. They
Oh,
brought a lifeguard. They brought a palm tree. They had music. And, she had the
stop
greatest
it,
time of her
doctor.
life.
Stop that.
Uh, and then,
Wow, that's so sweet.
that was so that's kind of what you were saying. And that's what some of the hospice and
Hmm.
palliative care people do. They really care. And it's cool to see that kind of thing,
Man,
just what you were
when I
doing.
hear stories like that, my faith in humanity, it's the world that I want to see. Like a lot of times when I see sports, I see, African Americans and white guys working together as a team, and I'm thinking,
Hmm.
why can't we have this world? Why can't
Yeah.
we have this world? Why does it have to be in little spots? Why can't we create this world? I don't know why.
Well, it was fun to interview some of these docs because I finally labeled these docs sappy do-gooders because there were a number of docs that just did stuff that just was beyond what you'd expect. I'll give you an example. Andy Rao is a cardiologist, and we're into adoption. We've adopted a bunch of kids. I don't know how many, but we've adopted a bunch, and so we were talking to Andy about adopting, and we were saying we've been to Romania, and there are lots of kids that we were adopting out from Romania. We had a little adoption
Oh,
organization,
nice.
and so I said to Andy, "There's this little girl. It's too bad she's not going to be adopted by anyone." Um, did we lose it again?
No, you're still here.
Okay, good. I'm there. Okay, and I said, what happened to this little girl is she was cold in the orphanage, and she had plastic shoes on her feet. She kept the shoes on, but she got close to a space heater, and the space heater melted her shoes and damaged her feet and disfigured her feet tremendously. So we expected that she'd never be able to walk again. And I said, it's too bad that little girl won't be adopted, won't ever be able to be adopted out. And we talked a little bit and what some other things, and then we left. And a couple of days later, I got a call from Andy Rao, the cardiologist, and he said, Scott, we talked about that little girl, and he said we'd like to adopt her. I said, what do you mean, Andy? You don't know who she is. You don't know whether she's got other illnesses. You don't know anything about her. And he said, well, it's okay. I talked with my wife, and we thought we have enough income, we have enough insurance, we can take care of her if she needs operations on her feet. We can arrange for that, and we'd like to help her out. Well, unfortunately, when I called the adoption agency, she'd already been adopted. She'd already been asked for by somebody
Oh, okay.
else, so he didn't adopt her out. But
Hmm.
I ran into that. Talk about, there's some good in this world. Lots of docs are sappy do-gooders, and I just was so. It was so touching for me
Hmm.
to talk with these
Hmm.
docs and to hear their stories and to
Hmm.
hear things like Andy Rao's story.
Hmm.
That was incredible.
Those stories need to be told so that people will have hope and know, because the culture projects a sort of a darkness on people. Relationships get broken up as a result of it. So many forces. That's sort of like a pushback that there's still good in the world. There's probably way more good out there than we even know about, and they don't want to tell about it. You would think they would tell about it, but everybody knows bad news is what sells newspaper and gets clicks and likes.
Yep,
Scary
yep,
stories get all the clicks and likes.
yep,
So,
yep.
but that is good to know. We've got another question here. It says, uh, "Have you heard of divine healings by Mother Mary visitations?"
Um, I don't know that much about Mother Mary, so I'm sure there are divine healings that happen all the time, and I'm
Hmm.
sure we're part of them, and I'm sure
Hmm.
that God directs doctors to do His will,
Hmm.
and so I think He works through all of us. He's probably working through your show right now to help people to realize that there's something else out there. So,
Hmm.
um, so I don't know for sure, but I'm sure there's divine healings all the time.
Hmm. The other thing about the stories that you're telling, and I don't even really want to say stories because they're not stories; they're truisms.
Right.
Um, but it's the pebble in the pond. When you tell us, and this goes out, that is going out. The in the ripples. When somebody
Yeah.
does good, that, for instance, the doctor that didn't get to adopt the little girl,
Hmm.
their heart was such that you must have thought, wow, that's pretty amazing to want to do this to somebody you never met and didn't know what condition there was.
Yeah.
So that happened, that had repercussions for you. And then
Yes.
everybody knows they attempted that. So sometimes the do-gooder act didn't happen, but the intent, the heartfelt intent, has just as much, to me, effect as the actual deed. And it
Yeah.
ripples out. And then I would hope, here's my hope, and I'm sure it's yours, if somebody reads your book or they hear this show or shows like it, that they'll go and be intentional to do good, to put a pebble in the pond, put a rock in the pond, and have their sappy do-gooderism ripple through. That's what we need, doctor. We need more people doing that. And I'm an optimist, and I'm saying
Hmm.
good will overcome the bad.
Have you heard of the butterfly effect?
No, but I heard a butterfly movie.
Okay, butterfly effect is they wrote a book about what's called the butterfly effect, and what that means is a butterfly flapping its wings in Africa may have an influence on the weather in the United States, and some of that's true, and I think you're talking about the same kind of thing with the ripple effect. That's pretty much what you're talking about, and that is you have someone that does some good here,
Mm-hmm.
and that say you go to a toll booth and put the money into the toll booth for the person behind you,
Mm-hmm.
or give the money to
Right.
toll booth collector,
Mm-hmm.
and that person behind you says, "Oh my goodness!" And then maybe they do something good for somebody
Mm-hmm.
else, and then maybe those two people, and it may the ripple effect may spread throughout the world.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm hopeful that these kinds of stories, or having people know that there's some good in the world, will help them feel better about themselves and help them do some good in the world too. And I think if
Mm-hmm.
each of us does that, it's going to be a lot better world.
That kind of goes back to what I said earlier about the two people that had the same terminal condition.
Hmm.
That your uh, your heart condition, your not your heart, but your heart condition has a lot to do with your healing or what type of healing
Yes.
comes to you. And I think you kind of mentioned that too in the first hour, that something you actually said, it seemed like it was given to healing was given to certain people because of something like that. I've had to make a determination in my life, doctor, that is, I'm not a proudful person. I can't stand that. I don't want to be that way, and so I'll do a lot of random acts of kindness I don't tell anybody about. And then it
Hmm.
dawned on me that because nobody talks about like this in a conversation. They say, "Oh, did you see this? Did you hear that? Oh, look over there. It's over.
Yeah.
The
Yeah.
vaccine's going to kill half the population. There's this." And I come to the determination that it's better that I tell somebody that I did, because then maybe they'll say there are people, like you're saying, there are people that do
Hmm.
things, and then they'll do it. But if I hold that within, or if you didn't write that book, the
Hmm.
repercussions would never happen. And it's not a
You're
prideful
right.
thing. You didn't write that book out of pride. Sounds like you wrote that book out of hope, and you want to present hope to people. That's what I'm getting out of these stories.
Yeah. I have a lot of reviews on Amazon, and uh, one of the main topics for a review is "Thank you for giving me hope again." And that really touches my heart, that people would get hope, would be given hope by reading some of these stories, that there's something good in the world, that there's something out there that is looking out for us. There's a higher
Hmm.
authority out there,
Hmm.
that people that have gone uh, before us still may look out for us, or may be aware of what we're
Hmm.
doing in
Hmm.
this life. And
Hmm.
so I think it's a ripple effect. I think you're absolutely right, and I'm hopeful that people will have hope,
Hmm.
because there's a lot of sadness in the world now.
Hmm. Well, I thought you were going to call me on it when I said, when I look around, I see, I wish the world was a certain way. I thought you were going to say, which I would have expected, well, you have your world, and work on your world, and I work on mine, and we'll build out. Eventually, the worlds will collide in goodness. But, the Indians believe that one of the truisms they believe is life is a web, and what you do to the web, you do to yourself.
Well, that's very true. I've when you do some things that are good for somebody else, invariably it comes back to you. I'll never forget. This is a small thing, but I'll
Mm-hmm.
never forget. I was in the doctor's coat area, and there's thousands of coats all over the place, and there was this coat on the floor, and I was in a hurry. I was going to make rounds, and I thought, I'm just going to zip in and zip out, and I thought, well, no, maybe I'll pick up that coat, and just hang it up for the poor doctor that dropped the coat. And guess whose coat it was?
Mm-hmm.
It was my coat. So I was picking up
Wow.
my own coat that had fallen on the floor. That's a little thing,
Mm-hmm.
but I think that kind of thing, happens all the time. When we do some good for somebody else, I'm sure that comes back around to us
Mhm.
and helps us too.
Mhm.
I've got another interesting story that's
Go
not in
ahead.
the book, but we were partners with a fellow that was having a lot of psychological problems, and he finally ended up leaving practice and going to another state, and he got into hooked up with the wrong group of lawyers and so forth, and he sued us, for taking his patients away. Well, that's crazy because he he left town. He wasn't ever going to come back. So who's going to take care of his patients? So ultimately, that suit was thrown out of the court because it was ridiculous. We lost $15,000 trying to defend ourselves, and so we were all madder than heck, at this guy that sued us. And so, interesting thing happened. About a year later, he called me up and he said, I'm sorry. I understand, that was a foolish move on my part to sue you guys, and would you mind giving me a reference for a new clinic that I'm trying to get
Oh,
into? Well, I thought to myself, here's this guy that cost me
wow.
$15,000. Am I going to give him a reference?
Mm.
And I thought, and I asked my friends, what should I do? And they all said, well, ditch that guy. It cost you so much money. But I decided to take the high road, and I said,
Mhm.
okay, I'll give you a reference. I'll tell him, honestly what happened because they knew and that he was a great doc. And I told him that. So he got the job. Well, about a year later, my son, who was living in the same town that he
Mhm.
was in medical trouble. He couldn't find a doc. He was really sick. And so, guess what I did? I called the fellow that I gave the reference to.
Mhm.
And I said, can you see my son? And he said, I'd be glad to. Send him right over. He took care of him, got him better. And what an interesting thing
Mm.
that, he literally saved my son and I helped him. So I think things that go around come around. I think you
Mhm.
do some good to somebody, even though they've been a schmuck to you.
Mhm.
That was a tremendous benefit to me, and I think it helped me more than it helped him. So I think the
Mm.
people that do good to others, even your enemies,
Mhm.
will get some return more than you gave out,
Yeah, and
which
I,
is
I
an
would
interesting
agree
lesson.
with you. It's always more. It's always multiplied. You don't think that, and I so
Hmm.
appreciate you doing that because yeah, that's a. How many times have people that are watching the show? We come to this a place where somebody does us wrong, and why is it our instinct is to fight back? Do
Sure.
something back, hit back,
Hmm.
whatever. That's not our normal way. So you really probably had some struggles there. What tipped your mind to say, you know what, I'm just going to help him out?
I don't know, to be honest with you. I was madder than heck at him, but I knew he was psychologically impaired. I knew he was struggling, and our job as a doc is to recognize. We see lots of angry people, and when people get sick, they get angry in many cases,
Mm-hmm.
and so I could probably see beyond. Uh, uh, and recognize the psychological issues and psychological problems that caused him to be as angry and upset as he was. And then he turned himself around. And so I think being a doc, you see those kinds of things and you take them in stride. So when a
Mm-hmm.
person yells at you like Mary, the one that arrested,
Mm-hmm.
you take that in stride and you still see them and you deal with them.
Mm-hmm.
I've got an interesting story about a fellow that I take care of, and
Mm-hmm.
I won't tell any names or anything, but
Okay.
he calls me all the time. I see him in the office at least once a week or twice
Mm-hmm.
a week. He calls me, and I was ready. I finally I didn't think I was doing any good for this guy,
Mm-hmm.
and I finally decided, well, maybe I should dismiss him from my practice. I'm not sure we're doing anything, and he's really bothering all the staff. And just before I was going to do that, I saw him in the exam room and he said, Dr. Kobaba, I want you to know how much help you're giving to me. When I was a baby, when I was a little boy, my folks didn't want me and they gave me up for adoption. They lived in the same town, but they didn't want me. They gave me up for adoption. So I lived in an orphanage all my,
Mm-hmm.
my childhood. I grew up in an orphanage. And every time I got sick, I would think I was going to die. And the same has happened throughout my life. And whenever I can call you and you can reassure me that I'm not dying, it makes a tremendous difference in my life. And I'm sorry I call you so much, but you really help me. Well, that's
Mm.
touch. How could I dismiss a guy after having him say that to me?
Wow.
That just touched my. And so when you walk in somebody else's shoes,
Mm-hmm.
you really know what they're
Mm-hmm.
going through, and you can really be forgiving. I think in many cases
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
because of that.
You remind me of a YouTube video come out a few years ago. Um, It starts off with a guy backing out of his driveway, and every day a little boy would come by on his bicycle and stop right in the driveway, and he'd be forced to stop, And so you think, get out of the way, kid. And then he would go to get some coffee, and then somebody would be, he wanted to get his coffee and get out real quick, but people were straggling along and delaying him, and he was getting angry.
Yeah.
And so he met all these people. Have you seen the video I'm talking about?
No, no.
Okay. So they play this video of him getting these obstacles, and then he's just resisting everyone. And then they replay it again, and they put the thoughts of the people that are in his way. For instance, he starts backing out, and the little boy on the bicycle says, "I wish he was my daddy, because my daddy doesn't live with me anymore." And then he goes to the coffee shop, and the waiter that's rude to him is having marital problems, and the person that delayed him was having, so he saw all these things that he had assumed, but all these people were really crying out. They had, like you're saying, things that you don't know about that's happening in them. So that tells you not to be so quick to judge if somebody's if they're even angry, and it's hard. It's like that first, when somebody does you wrong, you don't know what they just come out of it. Man, how bad would we feel if, just to say, we got an argument with somebody and that's the last word we had and they got shot, or somebody's wife just walked out on him, and the guy's miserable to you, and you call him an asshole. Let's just say, and then you find out, we would feel pretty daggone like a lowly worm at that point, I think.
I had an experience with a relatively young guy who had a very high triglyceride level. His normal triglycerides are 150. His was 1800. And so I gave him medication that controlled his triglycerides. It went down to 100, 150, but he stopped taking the medication. And after a year, his wife came and told me the story. The story was, he was out in the garage, and his daughter was doing something in the garage, and he was yelling at his daughter as forcefully as he could, and he dropped over dead. Can you imagine, from the triglyceride, plugging up his heart because he stopped his medication? Mm-hmm. Can you imagine how the daughter felt, how the wife felt? Here's a guy that his last words were anger to his family. You think about that, and it makes you want to maybe tone down your emotions a little bit and think about things. So I thought about that a lot.
Well, that's right. You never know when your time is, and I'm wondering, the question there that keeps coming up, that I'm keep thinking in this conversation is do we accelerate our demise by our heart condition, by what we, if we're running on anger, per se, rather than love, does that accelerate and increase your sickness, and does it accelerate your demise?
Yeah, for sure. People that are optimistic, that are happy, that are do much better. There's no question, in any disease and in life, that's true.
Mm-hmm. So when you're consulting a patient that has a terminal disease, how do you talk to them? What do you say to them?
Everyone's different, and it's really tough. You always try to give them some hope, that there's maybe something that we can do, but you just talk to them, and the most important thing, I think, is you listen to them. And people just need to be listened to. And I think my biggest job, I think, in my exam room is just listening to people, because they will frequently leave the exam room and say, "I feel so much better. I didn't do anything. I just sat there and listened." Mm-hmm. I'm kind of an authority figure, and if I listen to them, people like that. So I think that's, again, everyone's different, but I think if you listen to people and listen to their concerns and sympathize and just listen, that goes so far. So far.
I have your book again in our background there, Physicians, Untold Stories. But what if another doctor heard? Well, you have a book that has chapters of medical miracles. So within yourself, I'm pretty confident you're absolutely sure miracles, unexplained miracles, can happen. You don't know when or where, but they do. Yeah. But suppose you had that terminally ill patient come in, and you know all this, and then let's just say you said, "You know what? You're still here, and there's still time for a miracle," and then maybe another doctor heard you and said, "Why are you giving them false hope? They're clearly not going to make it."
Did you ever hear Joel Osteen?
Yeah, I've heard him.
Joel Osteen tells a story about his mother. His mother, at I think when she was about in her 30s, maybe early 40s, developed terminal liver cancer. And it's fun to listen to him occasionally. And he says that she was yellow. She got down to 85 pounds, and they were picking out her funeral dress and things like that. And she still had hope. She still was doing things. And what she did is she pasted pictures of her healthy body, her healthy when she was, playing with the kids, or when she was healthy, all over the house, so she could remind herself how health was. And they're a pretty religious family. They were praying and all those kinds of things. And it took about a year, but she didn't die. She slowly got better over about 2 years, and she's still alive. I think in her 80s right now. She overcame the liver cancer with no treatment. And so there are things that happen. Now, you don't want to give people false hope, but there are things that happen that are really strange. And tumors disappear. All of the doctors that I know have had people that have had terminal conditions that suddenly the tumor disappears. I've had a few of those myself. So you never know. You don't want to give people false hope, but you never know.
Mm. We had a guest on the show who said that they had abdominal pain right after this show ended. They were my guest. It was my guest, and he had to go rush to the hospital, and so I guess they operated on him, and I think they found the problem, whatever it was, and the doctor was talking to him after and said, "I see you've been operated on before. They did a really good job on you." He said, "What are you talking about?" Well, he never had any internal operations. The doctor assured him that him and his team saw where somebody had been operating inside of his stomach. And so he called his mom and said, have I ever had any operations that you know of? She said, no, you've never been operated on. But yet the doctors will swear you've had something. I'm wondering, was that a previous life or what?
Who knows? Who knows?
But that's an anomaly. These things are out there, and they come in all shapes, sorts, and this is why I always say there's just something else going on in this life. And it seemed like the better things of our nature are if we can tap more into those than into our sort of our carnal nature. We're basically trained to respond. The civilization trains us to be angry if somebody cheats you, or does something wrong. You get trained, and you see movies, retribution all the time. So it's really hard to bust out of that.
Yeah. It's interesting. When I was interviewing docs, I was expecting to hear all kinds of stories, the scary stories about, I saw what hell looks like or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't, none of the docs, I interviewed about, maybe 200 or 300 docs.
Wow.
None of them had a story of something negative or evil.
Mm-hmm.
They were all uplifting, phenomenal stories. Now, some of them, I included the ones in the book that made me cry or gave me goosebumps. That was my criteria.
Okay, good.
And so, but there were lots of stories. But the interesting thing is, not one story was of something evil or dark or black. I was surprised, to be honest with you. And like I said, I included the most significant ones that really touched my heart. But there were lots of stories out there, but none of them were of the dark side.
I think in the first story we were talking about in the first hour, did you say that somebody had like left their body and saw their body?
Yeah. That was Mary that left her body in the operating room when she was dead and was watching everything that happened. And that's like I said, her grandmother came to her at the same time and told her to be nice from then on, because she wasn't nice. And it was really a transformation. It was very interesting.
I always tell people, if they're complaining and they got, so I got all these problems. I always say, well, drive past the graveyard, because those people in there would love to come out of their box and have your problems.
Yeah.
So,
we see enough stuff in the office that's bad stuff that I come home every day thankful that I'm as well as I am. And and it's interesting, Daniel. You'll see people that you think are the pillars of society. The people that have it all together, and you'll start talking to them, and they've got this or that medical problem and that psychological issue, and be thankful for who you are. Be thankful for what you have, because there's so many people that you look up to, that we all look up to, that if you really knew what was going on inside them, you'd say they're a disaster. So I think we need to be very aware of how lucky we are, And like I said, I think if we're engaged in something worthwhile and something good, I think we get some extra help from above.
Get a little extra help. I think everybody could use a little extra help. And like I say, it's that Schrodinger's cat thing, man. You don't know your next diagnosis in your life, what that's going to be. And it may not be a medical condition. It might be
Right.
whether you're going to get a job or whether you're not, whether you're going to get a raise or you're not, that type of thing. But
Hmm.
now you just touched on, we're getting near the end of the broadcast, but you just touched on another thing that I think would bring healing to us. And that's to have a thankful heart. Because I think
Yeah.
being thankful is the same as being nice to somebody. If you're thankful, it seems like it generates positive vibrations, maybe. And I'm wondering if those positive vibrations get rid of disease.
Well, I think people that have a positive attitude that are thankful do get better, and they do heal quicker, and they may not have as many complications from an illness that other people do. There's no question. I think that's a proven scientific fact.
Mm-hmm.
So I think thankfulness, a positive attitude are all part of that healing process. And there are more and more oncology groups that are teaching that. They have people that actually teach thankfulness and positive mental attitude because it does make a difference.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So,
Well, we're right at
interesting.
the end of the broadcast, Dr. Kobaba, and tell people how to get the book and what to expect in that book.
Well, it's available at Amazon. Just go log on to Amazon and it's available there. It's also available through BookBaby, but Amazon's the big one. And what you can expect is stories that will give you hope. They'll make you laugh. They'll make you cry. And sometimes you'll do both at the same time. I also went into the stories about doctors and how some of the doctors had some phenomenal experiences escaping from communist Romania with Secret Service police chasing them and getting out of
Oh.
Cuba with their death threat and some interesting things about the lives of the doctors, more so than just the stories about miracles.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a fun book to write. People are loving it, and we've been incredibly successful with the book.
All right,
So,
Dr. Kobaba, I appreciate you coming on the broadcast. Can we have you on again sometime?
be glad to, Daniel. I've got another book coming out, the children's book. So when that comes out, I'll give you a call.
Yeah, give me a call. I'll get you right back on the show. How'd you like the interview format?
Oh, it's great. It's great. This is a real great format. There were no breaks for commercials. This is a great format, and you allowed me to talk as long as I wanted to, which is not being cut off. That's you're a great interviewer.
Oh, thank you so much. Yeah, we're gonna, and the miracle of editing, those freeze frames, we'll cut those out.
Okay.
It was as if it never happened, like Serve Pro. It never happened. All right, doctor, I appreciate you so much. Stay safe, and thank you for all the great stories. And thank you. And I saw this come through the chat. People are just thanking you just for being a doctor and helping people, dedicating your life to helping people out.
Thanks, Daniel, and thanks you for helping people out too.
All right, you bet.
So thanks. Bye bye.